on the website. And again, the intent is to go through the proposals on the agenda. These are ones that are not intended to be heard in the full committee hearings, just simply for time's sake. And we are just going to go through each of these in a more informal way, have a discussion, and kind of come to a consensus if we agree this should move forward or not. And then John from Noresco is here with us today to run through the proposals as he was the part of the ones we'll be hearing today. So I will screen share and we can move forward. I'll just make sure. Yeah, so the first one is proposal 95, and please let me know if I need to zoom in or move around. And John, if I need to go to a different section, please let me know.
Okay, great. So yeah, so this one is a proposal for the Denver Green Code, and it's the proposal is to recommend a requirement for increased cooling efficiencies, and in some limited cases, increased heating efficiencies for heat pumps for some select equipment. You know, these would be normally captured during a performance approach, a whole building, but the intent here is to really incentivize or the use of these high efficiency equipment such that they become more common and hopefully take one small step to drive the market. Courtney, if you could scroll down a bit, hopefully this made it on the, okay, great. So this is good here. So so there was a comment. So this was reviewed briefly earlier. The recommendations previously were in excuse me, in the context of the main body of the text of the requirements and in the numbered list. And what I've done here is I've created a copy of two of the tables from the IECC and identified exactly where the changes are, so it's hopefully much more clear. So if you notice, the first row has air conditioner, air-cooled systems. There was both split system and single package. The recommendation here is to increase the basically the seasonal energy efficiency ratio, or SEER, which is meant to be an aggregate or annual rating from 13 to 16.0 or 16.5 once the new SEER 2 rating becomes available, which is January 1st, 2023. It's a similar procedure, but I think there's slightly different test conditions which would generate a different rating value. If you scroll down a little bit, Courtney, please. Great, that's good. So, and then similarly for the larger air conditioners between 65 and 135 kBTU hours, and also the larger ones, 135 to 240. There's some similar changes made to both. Now these larger equipment have both the EER, which is a full load ratio design. It's meant to represent roughly a design test condition, the rating procedures at 95-degree dry bulb ambient temperature and running at full load, whereas the IEER is a composite of 4 different rating points that's meant to be more of an annual metric. And where the equipment manufacturers have really made some gains through staging of compressors and equipment and through controls is in the part load metric, the IEER. So all of these numbers, where do they come from? They weren't just kind of randomly picked. What I did to recap was looked at the current AHRI database and selected equipment efficiencies that were in the 80th percentile. So in other words, 20% of the equipment on the market should be a higher efficiency. Now that doesn't mean that 20% of equipment today are specified with higher efficiency, because these are used much less frequently. So these are high efficiency equipment, but they're equipment efficiencies that are available today. And if you could scroll down just a little bit more, please. So the next step was to just update the air-cooled unitary heat pump minimum efficiency requirements. So there's similar requirements that were updated here to raise the efficiency as well as the IEER for this type of equipment. And finally, hopefully, if it's a little bit farther, scroll down towards the bottom, there is a recommendation to increase the heating performance of heat pumps for the smaller heat pumps. Both the split system, that's good, thank you, and single package from the current 7.5, which would be this new metric. Again, the 2 just means it's an updated test procedure by AHRI that that has slightly different conditions, but it's analogous to the previous test. It just will have a slightly higher result in some cases. So we're recommending higher performance values for the HS heating season performance factor for small heat pumps as well as large heat pumps. So the main goal here is to target the equipment that are there's some splits here, but predominantly unitary or packaged equipment, 20 tons and below. Why these as opposed to central? Central equipment is a little bit different in terms of characterizing performance. You have you have the distribution system, the pumping, the staging of multiple chillers, for example, for central plants. And those are also typically, not always, but typically more complex buildings that are handled more often using a performance approach. So the goal here was really to increase efficiency and to do so explicitly in these prescriptive requirements to try to get to incentives in place to specify these types of equipment. And with that, I'll take the questions, and hopefully I have a bit of a cough. Hopefully this isn't too much of a nuisance for the other people on the call today. Thank you. Are there any questions either? Well, first maybe ask if there's any questions on the intent of the the approach to raise these efficiencies for the Denver Green Code. This is one option. This is certainly not the only way to do it. If there's any other thoughts of whether this is an appropriate way to address cooling efficiency, that I'm happy to take comments or questions. That's certainly something that's could be debated or discussed, as well as the efficiencies. And again, the efficiencies are simply based on an upper percentile, 80th percentile of the equipment that are available in the market today.
John, this is Eric Browning here. Question with respect to product availability. Understanding this is Green Code, you did indicate that some of this was coming available, meeting these higher efficiencies January 23, with the codes likely to go into effect just a couple months, maybe 60 days thereafter. The question of availability in our market, which I guess might be true for any equipment these days, does come to mind. That being said, Green Code is voluntary code as well, but just curious on any feedback in terms of setting these standards on things that are really only going to be coming available in the very near future.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, how to say this? So, in the equipment industry, obviously, they can't conjure up a ultra high efficiency unit from scratch quickly, and the requirements tend to be revised fairly gradually, I would say. So, and also the these 2023 efficiency levels that I have here, these can currently be met by equipment today, and they're not the highest best in class equipment, and they're also not equipment such that only one manufacturer can meet that level. So they're designed to be high efficiency, but not the ultra high efficiency or best in class, I would say.
Appreciate that.
And it's my experience too that even projects that are, companies work with a major retailer doing commissioning, and they have PB, they have other high efficiency practices in place, but it's often common for these types of units just to supply the minimum efficiency unit, which they're not bad. The minimum efficiency today is much better than it was 10 years ago or 12 years ago. So they're not bad units. I don't want to disparage them, and they work well, but it's often it's not terribly commonplace to supply the the higher efficiency units. And frankly, part of the reason is that the cost tends to be a little bit higher. They have much less throughput on the lines that are running the high efficiency requirements and less demands. The components are a little bit more refined. So there is a cost increment. It can be 10-15% equipment costs or more. That gets kind of diluted a little bit with the installation costs as far as percentage. But yeah, so see, the idea is really just to incentivize the high performance equipment.
Thank you, John. I want to make sure if there's any questions, we're able to discuss that. Open the floor. Chuck?
Yeah, and this is sort of the same same kind of idea that's been brought up previously. But in there you said to incentivize this higher performing equipment. This is green code, so it's a little different than mandatory. If we were talking about this in mandatory, I would recommend incentivizing it through more available points in the R406, and then with a higher, more restrictive energy requirements for performance, the design teams would have the option of using this more efficient equipment and using it based on availability, and it would give the ability for the design team to be flexible and use this equipment, where this is mandating it, which kind of limits the flexibility the design teams are going to have. And so it's kind of the same topic that's been brought up before. If this was going into mandatory, I'd probably push back more and lean towards giving the design teams more flexibility in their designs. But since it's going in green code, I'm not as concerned, but I still like the idea of giving more flexibility to the design teams and possibly just requiring more points in R406 or more stringent energy compliance in the performance path, which would hopefully at that point lean design teams into using this more higher performing equipment.
Right. So yeah, so that's a valid comment and approach, and I've thought about that. Certainly an alternative to this could be, well, rather than kind of dictate what efficiencies need to be set for the green code, and excuse me, an alternative could be to simply increase the number of points reflecting the likelihood that they would be able to install this high performance equipment. So I do see that as as a good approach, alternative approach to this. I guess it just depends. But this, do we want to be just finish this thought? Take this the excuse me, HVAC equipment just as one example. Do we want to just do we want to leave everything to credit points, options, and performance approach, or do we want to kind of push particular technologies along? And knowing that certainly the base code this couldn't be a valid proposal because of federal preemption laws. But for green code, it is an option. So it's just a question of whether this would be too restrictive. The efficiency levels are meant to be somewhat aggressive, but not so aggressive that they'd be, significant cost burden on projects. So, yeah, Chuck, there's other questions.
Yeah, and my only other comment is that I know there's another proposal that's a partner with R406 that allows the premium cooling efficiency to be rewarded. And so if the design teams did decide to use these higher efficiency or go beyond what this table is proposing, they will be rewarded with extra points in the table in R406. That was something else to kind of consider. And I agree. I don't know what the best path is. I think obviously if you're building a green building, I would assume these higher performing equipment would be installed. Whether it needs to be mandated or not, I don't know the right path.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, it's Elizabeth. I'll echo Chuck's comments there. Anytime that something's mandatory in a code, it makes me nervous. Or if we're adding new mandatory requirements. One thing that came to mind that it could be a conflict here is anytime we do a dedicated outside air system, we have trouble getting, we as the modeler have trouble getting the rated performance for the air handlers for a dedicated outside air system because they don't necessarily follow the same rating system. We would not be able to meet the higher efficiency requirements here with a dedicated outside air system with a DX coil. So that would probably preclude or inhibit that design approach under these standards.
Right, and this certainly wouldn't cover all projects necessarily. I have to check to see. I don't recall whether there was a separate rating for DOAS, maybe with the addition of the DX cooling.
Yeah, there's not in the IECC. There is a different standard in ASHRAE 90.1, but it is a problem with the IECC right now that it doesn't really deal with that very well. I know in some projects we've been able to just show, like I can't even get a rating for it. I can't get an EER, much less an IEER. I can get the ASHRAE rating for it, which is, I'm forgetting what that is. I can look it up for you, but it's some weird acronym.
It's something like ISRME.
Yeah, something with an I. Yeah, so that exists in the ASHRAE standard, but not in the IECC standard.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be a issue. Because presumably this high performance projects will be doing something like that strategy, and we wouldn't be able to document these efficiency standards.
Right. Any other
Yeah,
questions?
Christy,
Yeah, so I think what I'm just thinking is that by taking it out of the point system and having it be a separate provision, it still doesn't make it mandatory, because for all of our limited required use of the code, you get to pick. And then for our pilot projects, we could keep it as an elective. We know that we'll never move it to the IECC as a mandatory because legally we can't. So the benefit would be by having it be a standalone, it would encourage the selection of this equipment and help to make this equipment more available in our market, which might then instigate other teams looking for higher efficiency in the future if we if we choose in the mandatory code to make the points requirements more stringent, then this would already be something that would be available for people to choose, and they would be familiar with it because we introduced it as this thing that everybody should pay attention to in the Denver Green Code. So I kind of see, in my opinion, advantages to having it be a standalone as opposed to grouping it in with the points, just because it helps us to instigate the market. And correct me if there's a different perspective that I should take on that, but that's sort of just how I was looking at it.
Yeah, well, that's precisely why, why I have this here is to try to help move the market a little bit and to raise visibility to, the higher performance equipment, because I think too often, projects, I'm not saying I can't say that the higher performance equipment is not ever specified. It certainly is. But to my experience, it's not specified probably as often as it could be. So that would be, that would be an argument here. Now, I don't know if, on the flip side, if there's too many elective or prescriptive type requirements, then that may push people to go to the performance method more, which may be more or less desirable. But the idea, it's simply that, is to to push people towards higher performance design options. Because for these kind of systems, most of all of the other requirements that you can put, demand control, ventilation, variable speed drives, fault detection, all the controls options, et cetera, economizer, most everything else that you can do with these equipment is already a requirement. But the one thing that isn't is, well, there's two things. One is the efficiency, and then the other is the system manpower. But but with the efficiency, it's just simply trying to move projects in a certain direction. So, and I mean one thing, if this were, well, if this were technically feasible but more costly than I think it is, or more difficult to do, and people didn't specify it and were going around it, then that would not be the desired outcome. But that would at least give a signal to know that this that there's more work to be done on the efficiency side. But I think that the efficiency levels are pretty reasonable. It's just a question of whether this is the appropriate approach to making this efficiency gain.
To me, I feel like it's pretty benign, but I welcome other opinions.
Yeah, Christy, I agree with you for the reasons you stated. I guess my hesitancy of putting it in the base code is we do already have kind of credits for higher efficiency equipment in CU 406. This would be potentially a more elaborate option of that, but an option in the base code, where in the Denver Green Code, maybe this is a credit people gravitate towards for going to mandatory use of the Denver Green Code. And I think that, that's something that I don't want to limit. I want to give the option to the Denver Green Code for that as well. And again, we can't just put this in the base code as written for the legal reason. I'd love to hear others to see, so we can move forward on this proposal.
I'll just repeat again, if this is something that we're trying to encourage, you would not be able to do a dedicated outside air system with this standard. So whether we want to add another table, John, I don't know if you want to repeat the DOAS, the DX DOAS table from Azure 90.1 and pull that in here somehow. But right now, what is a very common high performance approach could not meet this standard.
And that's a great comment, Elizabeth. I certainly don't want to ignore that. John, are you able to, like, if we were to say we would like to move this proposal forward with incorporating Elizabeth's comments to make sure that is addressed. Would that be something you'd be able to modify?
Yes, I would. I mean, I'd have to review those levels. I'm not as familiar with that rating. I'm familiar with DOS systems and work with them, but I wouldn't just kind of broad brush make an efficiency jump on those types of systems without a little bit of investigation. But but that is something I could change. I could make.
Thanks for bringing that up, Elizabeth. We do see that as a really common strategy in buildings that are sort of in that in between, you know, doing a better building and something really high performance. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Are we all generally in consensus of moving it forward with John making those modifications to address Elizabeth's comments? Anyone opposed? Not seeing any no's. So that will be the direction we take for proposal 95. We'll move this forward with addressing those comments and keep it in the Denver. Thank you all. Let's move to the next one. And then John, as we're moving forward, can you just remind us of the proposals that we've already heard or what are coming back, and then maybe we don't keep as in depth the second or third time around?
Sure.
Yeah.
This one. Okay, yes. So this one we have reviewed before, and there are a number of good comments here. Excuse me. This was to a requirement. Again, this is Denver Green Code, so it's not the base code. It's an option. But for buildings in Denver Green Code to have drain water heat recovery devices installed on all R2 occupancies or shower facilities, and in all buildings that have 4 or more showers and a shared drain line. There were some in the first paragraph, just to recap quickly, you know, whether it's a distributed system where the drains are getting together on a single manifold, or if there's a single heat recovery device on each shower drain, either of those options would meet the requirement. Central systems, water heating systems, drain water heat recovery systems would also meet the requirements. And then the last sentence on the first paragraph was kind of geared towards addressing a specific type of system and application for wastewater use for the heat pump water heater. There's a particular product there that uses that technology that would also, even though it's a different technology, would definitely meet the intent of this section. The new line, I was trying to keep something kind of simple and clean for this to get the main intent without making it overly difficult to track or enforce, knowing that maybe there might be some drains on the ground floor of the building that might have more difficulty with installation. Is I have a requirement that here it's simply stated that drain water heat recovery shall be installed on a minimum of 80% of shower drains. I know it's kind of broad brush, simple requirement, but I was trying to address something without getting too complicated on the nuances of the installation. And then for the other addition here, just beneath that, is for some of these numbers were kind of just representative of facilities, but commercial buildings with at least, oh, that should say 50, sorry. I guess commercial buildings with at least 50 dwelling units, that number could be adjusted. It's meant for multi-story apartment buildings that have at least 5 laundry, washer, and dryer machines shall have drain water heat recovery installed on the laundry. And then laundromats that contain at least 10 commercial washers shall also have drain water heat recovery. The other cleanup was to simply remove some of the references to the IPC and IAPMO, and to reference the requirements for the UPC. And I've kind of kept this kind of broad brush, just referencing section 505.4 that covers the requirements for single and double wall heat exchangers without getting too overly specific for that. So those were the changes made. So there's a bit of cross out and additions here, but I wanted to hear from the group whether those changes are clarifying the requirement, because I know I'm trying to address two things here. One is the shower drains, and then one in some cases is the laundry. So trying to keep those requirements distinct and separate in this proposal.
Open the floor to any discussion. You don't need to raise your hand. This is a more informal. Please.
Yeah, for those that missed the first round of this, so the drain water heat recovery, the basic devices are fairly simple and straightforward. They're passive devices. There's multiple manufacturers that make them. The other, there's different configurations of how they can be plumbed together, but these are pretty straightforward. And the reason why this is in the green code as opposed to a base code is that with the cost and the installation costs, it's kind of on the margins of cost effectiveness. It isn't always cost effective. It's not the costs don't far outweigh the benefits, but it's kind of it's not a slam dunk for just putting in from a straight cost effectiveness standpoint, at least from the studies that were done for other jurisdictions.
So, did you want to add something?
No, I think I made a point on this during, I think, the same amendment went through for the residential section that I'm personally not a big fan of this technology. I've looked at it a number of times, and as it was just stated that the payoff's tough. Going into the green code, I think where we ended up on the residential side was going into the green code. I think it's all right being in a voluntary code to try it out and see if we get some adoption, those types of things. If it was in the base code, I think I would personally be much more vocal about it, because I haven't been able to get this technology to pencil, and would, as a builder developer, would much rather be spending my energy conservation dollars in another location.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Phil. Because it is in the Denver Green Code, do you see this as a viable path, an option for teams?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a commercial developer, so I'd have to look at people that are a little more commercially focused on the specifics of this. But I think in general, I'm okay with it being in a voluntary code to see if they can get some adoption on it. Would this be a mandatory requirement as part of the code, or part of a pathway that they could choose from?
So to answer that question, we are looking at the Denver Green Code currently to align it with the level for LEED Platinum. So there aren't, at least for the energy side, haven't been decisions made on what would be mandatory and what would be elective until we do that investigation with NORESCO on the energy aspect of it. I imagine this proposal would fall more under the elective just because it, but I guess I can't promise that specifically. But I would feel like that's where it would probably align more.
Do you think you can give us a few more examples? You mentioned you'd rather spend your money in other areas as it pertains. Could you share with the committee just additional reasons why to give us a better understanding?
Well, it's been a while since I put pencil to paper on this, but it's been in a residential application where just the energy savings I was receiving were not, I could spend my money better on doing better windows or putting an extra solar panel in and getting much more benefit out of it than I could by putting drain waste heat recovery in. So I'd rather, obviously, you know, I look at it a lot as energy savings per dollar spent. Where can I get my most bang for the buck? And this always just slid real low on the table.
Yeah, I guess the counter to that might be that on a project that is going, you know, that's either trying to be net zero or really push it the way, you know, you don't always look at the strategies that are great returns. You just say, okay, what helps move us closer to zero or drop that EUI. So I like it as an option, but I agree that if you insist on it, it might be hard. And I know it's an optional portion of the, you know, it's optional code. But if somebody has the mindset that says, hey, we're going to use the Denver Green Code, I think they probably have a mindset that not everything they're going to do is going to be the most cost effective. They're really pointed towards a better building.
And I think I might pile on to that to say that, and I'm speaking secondhand on this, but talking to teams that have pursued either zero net energy or zero net energy ready, doing a value engineering chart and saying cost per EUI has brought waste heat recapture higher in the value chain and has resulted in it being installed on some project types, multifamily residential mainly. So I would love to see it encouraged to be investigated, because we have seen teams use this to and use it in a cost-effective way when they were saying cost per EUI and figuring out how to get to the EUI that they needed to get to achieve their goal. We know that it's been selected for some high-performing projects.
Yeah, as far as elective versus mandatory, you know, anything can be elected if there's a way to represent it or model it in performance. And on the shower drains, it might be possible. You know, something like laundry, then it becomes a little trickier because just in terms of getting valid or viable schedules and operating use patterns. You know, something like space heating, cooling, that's very, very well known. Water heating is somewhat known, but a little bit more of a variable. You know, you can make up any, you know, schedule you want, right? But is the schedule, you know, valid and representative of typical conditions? So so that might be a consideration in terms of the you know, the handling it as an option versus a mandatory. But I understand the issues with the kind of the marginal gains you might get from this versus other bigger bang measures.
Christy, maybe you can answer this. So is the overall goal to have this proposal in there long term? Or is this something we're going to try out? How close is this going to get us to zero net energy, or in the big picture, if you will?
So it really depends on the project, because depending on the water use in a project, you know, the energy gained will vary. I think the goal, from my perspective, the goal is to bring this to the forefront in the minds of team members, to have them consider something that they might be less familiar with and might not typically gravitate to, because when they actually dig into it and they're really trying to figure out how to get to compliance, they might uncover something there and start pursuing something that they hadn't really pursued before in the past. Whether or not this would go to mandatory code, I mean, I can't predict necessarily what everybody would encourage or what we would learn from the market, but from what we're hearing here, it sounds like if we were to try to put something like this into the mandatory code, there would be a lot of reason not to. And so if that continues to be true, then I wouldn't be a proponent of putting something into the mandatory code that is high cost for small efficiency gains. So I think we would have to consider that in the future, but just for gaining greater acceptance and familiarity and analysis of the technology on more projects by more teams, I think it could be really beneficial.
And you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I'm not an expert on this one. I got to be honest with you, but just listening to all the comments, if there's a way not to put that in the mandatory sec and maybe give some points or something like that as an optional, is that something that we could consider?
Nothing is being put into anything mandatory through these conversations. So the analysis that Noresco is helping us with at the end is figuring out which provisions we need to make mandatory in order to bring the level of benefit achieved through Denver Green Code pilot project use as written path. We want that to be equivalent to LEED Platinum, right? So that's when we start talking about quote unquote mandatory versus elective, and that the mandatory versus elective would only apply to 5 or 6 pilot projects that would choose the Denver Green Code and then choose the Denver Green Code as written path. Everything else in the Denver Green Code is going to be in the group of provisions that the limited mandatory use that we're applying to commercial projects simply means the project teams will have to select a small number of provisions from each chapter, and we are not saying which ones. We already know we're not going to say which ones. So nothing that we're talking about here will be mandatory for all commercial projects. The only mandatory, and we have to refine our use of the different terminology, but the only mandatory setting would be a team chooses to do the Denver Green Code pilot program and then chooses to do the Denver Green Code as written path. And it'd be really doubtful that we would put this as a mandatory because it doesn't even make sense for all project types. So I personally would say, no, this shouldn't be mandatory.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess yet another option would be to add it to energy credits and with a commensurate amount of points, and then see if ideally, I don't, in California, well, I'm from California for those on the call that don't know, but the amount of actual project data we get as feedback from codes is not the best. So ideally, if we had it as an option, you would get some kind of data to know, okay, this has been being used, 10% of the time or 30% of the time, or not at all, or 2% of the time, to know whether, this credit is pushing people to, to make it as an option. And of course, you're not going to artificially create a credit that gives more credit than it should get. But just in terms of design options.
Yeah, and I'll join in the conversation. I mean, the way this is written, it's trying to detail when it's required. And I think the language that would, if it was a credit, I think it could be, the language could be flipped to identify when it can be used as a credit. Because obviously it's not beneficial for all types of buildings, and there's limited gains on some types of buildings. But the way it's written here, it's kind of detailing when it's required or should be provided. And most of my comments that I made last time, just struggling with the application of this section, is still kind of stand. Like the first sentence, we talk about commercial buildings and all R2 occupancies. Then the next sentence is devices shall be installed in all non-residential buildings. So is that different than the commercial and R2 buildings? I think we could almost delete the entire first sentence and just say any non-residential building that has 4 or more showers on a shared drain line would meet that requirement. Then we go through the different design options, which I think is good. It might make more sense in a list. It might be easier to read as a list. Like must comply with one of the following, and go A, B, C, D. The last sentence, it talks about a central heat pump, water heaters that use wastewater for heat rejection. I believe that should be as a heat source because they're extracting the heat from the wastewater.
Excuse me.
I understand the drain water, the next sentence where it talks about the 80% of shower drains was put in there to possibly exempt the first floor. But I think there needs to be some sort of exception in there for a one-story building and not having to use wastewater recovery in a slab. This is a new section with the commercial buildings with 50 dwelling units that have at least 5 laundry washer dryer machines. Is that intended to be within the unit, or is it like a laundry room or a laundry area? Because I would think that you'd want to do the heat recapture on the individual laundries, clothes washers in the units as well. I don't understand why dryer machines is added to this section because I don't think we're recapturing heat from them. Let's see, and then we do enforce the IPC here, so those references to the UPC need to be updated to IPC.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, the dryer, that can correct that. Certainly can make this as kind of a list of requirements. With the laundry, I think the intent, you could have it, I guess, potentially in every dwelling unit if a dwelling unit had its own laundry or washer. But the thought was it would be probably more cost effective to do in a, say, an apartment building that had centralized washer dryer facility versus multifamily building where there were a washer in each unit. So that was kind of the thought. Excuse me, for that.
But I mean, if we have a multifamily building, a multifamily R2 building with more than 4 units, we're going to have heat water recovery required on the shower. So I would think that the heat recovery for the shower and the clothes washer could be tied together, or should be tied together. That would be sort of one and the same.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I'm not entirely sure that they typically are. I guess they could be. I think I think between the two, I think that the shower drain is probably the more easily implemented option for these. But it seems like with the washer machines, especially if there's multiple together in the same room, that there might be an opportunity there.
Thank you so much, Chuck, for going through that. I didn't capture the notes properly in the first paragraph up here. I know you mentioned taking out this first sentence. Then that would mean that R2 occupancies wouldn't be addressed.
Well, but Denver specifically defines R2 occupancies as non-residential in the IECC.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Is that clear though? Like, I understand that is a clear message, but when I think of R2, as I'm reading the code, I don't always think of that being non-residential. I think, oh, it's a residential building. I just want to make sure the intent comes through. And if you think that's clear, then that's fine.
No, let's see. So then I think we should combine the first two sentences and have a drain heat recovery system shall be installed for all commercial buildings or IBC R2 occupancies that have 4 or more showers on a shared drain line. Because the way it is now, to me, it's kind of confusing. Because it's sort of hints that all commercial buildings require it, and then any R2 that has 4 or more that have shower facilities would require it. And so, if the intent is for commercial or R2 occupancies that have 4 or more showers, let's just say that. But then further on down, then we include clothes washers as well, which kind of adds another layer. There's different requirements in different areas of this section that make it tough to follow.
Did I capture that right? Last part sounds a little odd.
I think we can drop the on shower facilities.
And Chuck, did I miss any other comments from you on here?
Well, like the next 3 sentences are trying to detail the different types of systems that would meet the intent of this section. And I think you could maybe list them out as options, because the way it reads now, it's all like one paragraph. And if it was any of the following would meet the intent of this section, it might be easier to digest as a reader for somebody who's trying to follow this section.
Yeah, I agree.
So are we all in agreement with the intent of this proposal, with John making modifications as we've discussed that are in the notes, with the modifications he made just on the screen? Would we be good to move this forward with the understanding that John would make some of these updates? I should always ask it in a negative way. So no one disagrees with that. Okay. John, is that clear for you?
It is. I probably might coordinate a little bit with Chuck to make sure. I think I've got the other edits needed.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'd glad to share my thoughts.
Great, thank you all. With that said, let's move on to 74.2. Zoom in, and John, it's all yours.
Yeah, so I think this one, I don't know if we've reviewed this one before. I don't think so, but excuse me. This one covers the solar access requirements. So this is, setting up a prerequisite or foundation for having PV on the roof. So the solar access is just designating essentially a solar zone or solar ready zone on the building plans that meet the specifications of Appendix CB. The zone is located on the roof. It can also be on the overhang of a building if there's an overhang, or if there's another structure located within 250 feet of the building, on the building premise, or on a covered parking. So those are all areas that where this solar access zone can be specified. There's a big exception here, exception 1, which is non-residential and high-rise res buildings with 6 or more stories above grade. That was essentially based on typical building floor plates, was deemed to be the height at which it's difficult to meet the requirement, the Denver PV requirement with PV on the roof alone. There's not an assumption that a parking garage will always be available on site, although in many cases it might. As far as shading, there's basically some language here to indicate that the solar zone shall be located and not be shaded from any architectural features, vents, chimneys, any rooftop equipment, which will be shown on the plans, or neighboring buildings. If there are obstructions, take for example, condensing unit or rooftop equipment as an example, the part of this, the part of the solar zone has to be can be no closer than 2 times the height of the obstruction, basically. So there's some guidance for identifying the solar zone here. The exception for that is anything, certainly obviously to the north of any points on the solar zone would be not considered an obstruction. There's a requirement for structural design loads on the construction documents. So the roof dead load and live load shall be clearly indicated on the documents. And then as interconnection pathways, the documents have to indicate a location that's also dedicated for inverters and metering equipment, and a pathway for routing a conduit from the solar zone to the point of interconnection. Let's see, the main service panel has to have a minimum bus bar rating of 200 amps, and the panel shall have a reserve space to allow for installation of a double pole circuit breaker for a future solar electric installation. Let's see, if you scroll down a little bit, please. Okay, stop there. So this defines, I think this is more or less existing language. It defines the solar ready zone and the requirements. It has to have the minimum capacity of greater 1 watt per square foot and 5 kilowatts DC. So the 5 kilowatts is just to kind of make sure that there's a minimum photovoltaic requirement that can be met on site. The solar ready zone has to be oh, this is an exception. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, I get confused here. So if there already is a renewable energy system on site that has at least 1 watt per square foot, then the solar ready zone is a requirement is not is exempted, as well as if there's a building that has shaded for more than 70% of daylight hours annually. There's a couple other exceptions here. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's requirements here for the interconnection pathway, energy storage system ready area, as well as the certificate for the construction documentation. So the main goal of this is to identify a requirement for a solar ready zone that can really clearly spelled out on the construction documents. That is a sufficient area that it can meet the PV requirements for the Denver code, and to identify the area and make sure that there's no conflicts with shading from other rooftop construction obstructions or nearby buildings, and as well as to make sure those areas are relatively accessible for the PV installation. We did have a requirement for that zone had to include contiguous amount of areas. I think we removed that because part of it is part of the desire is to minimize penetrations of the roof for installing the PV panels and the racks. In some cases, the PV panels can be supported by ballast. Seeing a lot on retail buildings here. So we don't have any specific requirement for that right now in this proposal. And that's all I have for this one. So I'll take any questions.
Hey, John, I have a quick question on one of the exceptions. It just might need a clarification. It's the first exception under CB 103. The building with the permanently installed on-site renewable energy with existing capacity is the minimum of the greater of 1 watt per square foot. What square foot are we referring to? Is that the roof? Is that the array itself?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I think it's the roof. I may need to double check that though. That's a good question. Yeah, Elizabeth, I'm going to need to double check that to be sure. I think it's the roof there. Excuse me.
I was thinking it was actually the array, but we should probably clarify. Thanks.
Excuse me.
John, I had a question. Maybe this is obvious to others, but this section CB 103 solar ready zone, is that being brought in from an appendix, an existing appendix? None of it's new language and labeled in different ways.
Yes, this is sorry. Yeah, I believe this is an existing appendix. I'm gonna have to look up to identify the IECC document I have open. That's not showing as part of that, but I think pretty sure this is an existing appendix.
So moving that into the Denver Green Code, we want to reformat that, right? Because it's not an appendix to the Denver Green Code. We're taking an appendix from the IECC and placing it in the Denver Green Code.
Right, yeah, so I'm not sure the exact proper protocol for porting this to the Green Code since it's part of the IECC.
Are there any other discussions we'd like to have? Any other questions for John?
John, I'm trying to look at this one next to the IECC section CB 103. Just trying to find, what's different. Or, what are we adding or changing anything there? And I'm just having trouble going back and forth trying to find any differences. Are we just taking that whole appendix and throwing it in? Or have we made any changes that you could point out to us?
Yeah, I may need to mark this more carefully because we're keeping all the same intent, but I think some of these exceptions, especially exception 1, appears to be new. I haven't looked at this in a little while. The building with permanently installed on-site renewable energy system. So I may need to go back and mark this more carefully to show what's been changed.
Yeah, that was the only one that has jumped out at me so far is that with existing everything in the with existing capacity, blah blah blah, that part's added, but I'm trying to look in between them and I can't see what else has been added or changed from that appendix. Maybe if there's a way that if we can highlight that so that that's drawn to our attention.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Courtney, I don't know if you can highlight the first exception as new language. I'll make a note too for.
And the exception is there, but the way that it reads in the IECC is that it just says a building with a permanently installed on-site renewable energy system. So here we would, only part of that is new. You know what I mean? It's not the whole exception. So I'm just trying to isolate what language is different from the current, I guess this is an appendix CB.
Yeah, so you're right. I think the language after energy system should be is new, but I probably will have to go through it and 100% verify that.
And John, or maybe Eric can help clarify, since this would all be new into Denver Green Code, wouldn't it all be underlined? Am I misinterpreting that?
I'm just, for our review, I'm trying to figure out what is different from standard Denver code. Like I see another one that just jumped out under the solar ready zone area. The standard IECC says it's 40%, and this is changing 40% to 60%.
Yeah.
Which is hard, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's basically your whole roof.
Yeah, and it doesn't leave room for the realities of a 4-story building having a sea of condensing units up there.
Yeah, I mean, there's the exceptions in here where, the exception number 4, where the licensed design professional, blah, 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 that kind of gives you an out there for things that just aren't physically achievable.
Yeah.
But yeah, 60% will be We probably won't quite get all the way there on some buildings, but you can get there on a lot. Some can. I think that's fine as written. Just so everybody knows, 60% is hard.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is. It's not easy. I mean, the PV requirement is pretty significant. So. Any other questions, comments?
Anyone object to moving this one forward with some of the items clarified and marked up?
Yeah, I think we also, just since the Denver Building Code has some amendments to this section, like with battery storage and that kinds of thing. If we can just either compare those and either reconcile them or point out where some of the differences are, that'd be great. So, where is the green code pushing things beyond what's in the regular code?
I would want to make sure that we're not losing anything either.
Right.
From the current Denver building code. And then for this. Okay. Is this one that you feel would want to come back to this committee once the information is present, or is John marking this up and moving it forward acceptable?
I feel like we need to see this, Courtney. There's a lot of formatting that needs to be presented here. Unless nobody else does. I mean, I'm fine looking at it internally at the city level, but I'd like to give the other committee members the opportunity to see it again if they so choose.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise. Make sure. Yeah.
I agree. There's a lot of consternation about this one the first pass through. So to see how it's been modified, I think would be worthwhile.
Sounds good. We will put this on a future list after modifications from John. Great. I'm going to move on to 62 unless there's any other comments on this one. Okay, I think we're good. I think we, as just quick background, I think we reviewed this at the very, very first offline hearing where John wasn't even present. So I guess we're not either. So John can walk us through this one. Appreciate
it. Okay. Yeah, so I'll start really high level. So the idea here for air leakage testing is to essentially require, excuse me, require air leakage testing for commercial buildings and the high-rise residential buildings, and not rely on just equipment, statement of equipment materials used for air barrier to provide assurance that the building is reasonably airtight. So that's the overall overall intent of this. So that as I mentioned, it would include group R&I occupancies. I'll just, some of this is existing, but for the buildings that are tested, they're tested to meet the air leakage requirements, and if they're not met, a visual inspection and diagnostic testing shall be performed, and all leaks shall be sealed, where such leaks can be made without destruction of existing building components. And then it would be retested to verify that the leakage rate was at least no greater than 0.6 CFM per square foot, a building shell area at 75 pascals, and retested. So residential occupancies, they have a requirement that to be retested if the air leakage rate exceeded 0.45 CFM per square foot in the initial test. So the retesting requirement is there, and I think the key change, or at least the driving force for the change, is to not allow. If you scroll down a little bit, yes, this is good. So either on a material basis for both the roof and the wall assembly, the window jambs and connections, to not rely on a statement of materials to to provide confirmation that the building meets the airtightness requirements of the standard. And so this assembly materials sections were removed from the code, and then can you scroll down a little bit, please? Yeah. So this reference basically to the inspection or continuous air barrier components and assemblies has been removed as an option. So it's steering building projects to do the air leakage testing, and also to have a protocol in place for doing retesting if the air leakage rates exceed a certain threshold. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Take any questions on the details.
John, I think I missed the first review of this, but is it also looking, is the intent also to remove that building envelope performance verification section as well? I see that it's marked out in some sections, but it's not actually in the remove from code section. So I was just curious what the goal was there.
Which section were you referring to?
So it's C402.5.1.5. Which it's okay, yeah. Any reason for wanting to remove that?
I think it's the main motivation is that just a visual inspection of the air barriers or any components is not sufficient to verify that an air leakage rate has not been exceeded. So I think that's the main goal, is to really steer people towards doing the air leakage testing, and then if they're above the required threshold, to take mitigative actions and to do a retest.
Okay. I guess so. When I was reading the code and trying to interpret all of this, my understanding of it, and again, some of the exceptions in the 2021 base code make it a little difficult, but the way that I interpreted it was that they would do this building envelope performance verification and testing. And I could easily be wrong in that because this is at least the way that it reads now is very complicated. So I don't know, we just find that if we're wanting people to hit 4 CFM per square foot of shell area or even lower, having somebody look at a plan set and having somebody walk the building at rough and review things just dramatically increases the likelihood of being successful.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm looking at this section now, and I think part of the reason it was removed is it was referencing other sections that we were removing. But maybe we can retain it and reword it to, you know, to keep in that initial check.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's. Again, I have difficulty advocating for this because this is the work that we do, and so I don't want to, you know, advocate on my own benefit over here. But that's been our experience, that this is doing these types of inspections make sure, or just allows the building to be so much more successful.
And that cost for return is so, you know,
Yeah.
if you look at that 100,000 square feet at 9 cents a foot, even developers can't argue with that.
Yeah, you know, I look at the cost, our cost to do an inspection versus our cost to do another test. Whew, big difference.
I completely agree with Nathan. I just want to make sure, John, as we're reviewing this and modifying it, that this falls under the reference about buildings that don't complete an air barrier test. So it sounds like, based on this conversation, we want to make sure they are doing this regardless if they have passed or not, and not give them a out to do that. I'm trying to say that right, but we want to make this part of the requirement in this code section, not as an out to not meet the test.
Right, and I think this is a good
There was really good language around this in the code amendments last year. At least I thought, from reviewing it, it looks like it talked through, yes, doing the test, yes, doing this visual observation, yes, doing a plan review. And it seemed really consistent. And it looks like, at least our understanding when adopting, was that it was the intent of where the 2021 code was going, but it looks like some changes happened in committee, as it always does. So if you're looking for good language, I would suggest looking to the code amendments from last cycle for Denver.
Just sort of a question on intent. We're trying to like reduce or eliminate the exceptions for buildings that don't complete the testing, correct?
that's right.
Or, you know, it's just like eliminate some of the exceptions. Like we lost some of our indent there, but the exception, I guess it's not really an exception. We're just, the formatting got a little bit messed up there, but the cross out of the buildings or portions of buildings that do not complete air barrier testing, blah, blah, blah. That was, we're removing that option for compliance, right? That, and I think that's sort of aligns with the old code, or I should say the current code, where we're saying that there are no exceptions to air barrier testing. And am I saying that correctly? Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing, and it makes perfect sense, is that we want to keep that initial inspection in place. and just modify section 42515 that references this the new proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think this could be a lot simpler. We don't have to cross out all of those things. If we just cross out that air barrier compliance option 3, I mean, just to save you some work, makes it a little easier. Like if you just cross out that bit that's highlighted in gray there, then you don't really have to worry about anything else because we would never reference them by default, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just trying to make this easier for people to understand.
Yeah, especially because this section that we don't want to cross out anymore references 1.3, 1.4, which are these, which would bring those back. So then, and this also would be part of that. So we're really not crossing out anything. We would just be removing.
I think that, yeah, just that. And of course, then the other exceptions, the actual exceptions, number 3 is really the only one that applies, where it's buildings between 5,000 and 50,000 square feet in climate zone 5B. If we're wanting to delete that exception as well. So maybe just to sort of highlight those bits is what we're deleting. And then as Nathan noted, we did have some nice language there in the old code about what happens when buildings don't comply. And if that it should be added in here, maybe it is. Sorry, I'm just having trouble seeing what's what's new and what's old. And
Yeah, I think the language that was in the old, or I guess the current code, was a little vague. It kind of said, if you don't meet the 0.4 CFM per square foot of shell area, then you should do some investigation and then fix the items that you can fix without deconstructing, which I think as a implementation of this, I think is a great place to start. But I do think this new language about, putting that, kind of options of, okay, yep, if you're at, 0.4 to 0.6, then you're within the range. If you're at above 0.6, let's start to really make some corrections is probably a lot more reasonable if we're looking at, the next code cycle. We haven't had too many builders fail these tests yet, but I think having, adjacent, or I guess, other local municipalities that have required testing for a while has helped prepare some builders. I apologize, but I've had a conflict pop up and sorry to start a conversation and run, but I've got to.
Thank you for your feedback, Nathan. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Any other questions, comments from the group? This one I think will need a little bit of rework to clarify the exception that needs to be removed and to retain most of section 402.5.1.5.
Right, I think John want to see that come back just to make sure we're all looking at this proposal.
Any questions with the intent and the overall kind of approach of what we're doing here?
No, I think we're good. So we'll rework. Sorry if my microphone's off, but we'll have Don rework some of this and bring it back. And I think we'll all be looking at the same thing that we're discussing right now. So, we can move on to 20.
Great. Is this 26, Courtney?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one is I think we've seen this before at some point. This one we're attempting to address unregulated loads, and this is part of the Denver Green Code. As by definition, unregulated loads are difficult to enforce because there's not a strict accounting of these, and many of these are maybe installed after permit and may not be part of the construction documents. So here goes. Let me so the changes here made, one is to try to improve the efficiency of certain appliances, and we reviewed this before with an issue on the ADA. Is requiring Energy Star Most Efficient, which is another tier above regular Energy Star, for clothes washers, dishwashers, refrigerators, and freezers. And those were selected because those were appliance types or categories where, number one, there was significant market penetration already for Energy Star products, and number two, there was another tier of efficiency available. And the addition I made, if you scroll down a little bit, please, there is towards the bottom of this, there's an exception that I've added basically to cover the exempt Energy Star Most Efficient appliances. If it can be shown, ADA requirements result in no qualifying products. Projects, now I do say products shall use Energy Star appliances where the exception is claimed. So we could go one step further than that, I guess, and exempt even Energy Star products also. But that's the exception I've added here. Let me go through the others, and then I can take questions. The second significant change is to reduce for Denver Green Code, to reduce the threshold at which new buildings have to have an energy monitoring system to monitor and report energy consumption. And the threshold was reduced from 25,000 square feet down to 10,000 square feet, which is fairly low. So this is fairly aggressive. But part of the rationale for this is a lot of these smaller buildings, your Walgreens, your standalone retail, small offices, they may not have a real strong on-site maintenance presence and program in place. So, beside things like, changing, air conditioning filters, there may not be much that's done. And with commercial buildings in particular, one thing that's observed is the building can be perfectly comfortable, but the systems might be broken up on the roof, and you might not know it, at least not initially. So there needs to be some, accounting of energy use, especially when the tenants of the buildings might not be as closely tied to the utility bills. And so for this requirement, the R2 occupancies are exempted since they're not, they don't have individual tenants don't have responsibility for the overall building. The next one is that there's a disaggregation of end uses. Plug loads, excuse me, sorry. Including appliances exceeding 25 kVA kilovolt amps in an area less than 5,000 square feet shall be separately monitored. and buildings with service greater than 250 kilovolt amps, plug loads shall be separated or disaggregated either by floor or by occupancy type or area. So again, this is kind of follows the adage, you can't save what you can't measure. So it's to promote self initiated efforts towards managing and addressing energy consumption in the building. So that's that was the scope of this one for the green code. I checked there already is a provision in there for plug load occupancy based or receptacle controls for plug loads in some cases. So this is really addressing some of the other end uses. I think in the future, someone could, if there were, scope down the line, someone could, look at things like elevators and other end uses, but this one kind of really addresses mainly the appliances in the space. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I'd like to ask Elizabeth if that exception that you added addresses the comments we talked about in the very first conversation about you having trouble finding an appropriate product that meets the ADA requirements. Do you feel like this addresses that sufficiently?
Sorry, I'm reading.
Sorry, is this one up on the main web page too? For some reason I'm not finding it.
And the link.
70148. It's under DGC, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm putting the link to this exact PDF in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. What?
In that exception one, what is the last statement there? Projects shall use Energy Star appliances where the exception to Energy Star most efficient is claimed. What does that mean, exception to Energy Star most efficient? Is that somewhere else?
Well, the requirement, the proposed requirement is Energy Star most efficient. So the idea here, and this could be relaxed, I think, if the group thinks it needs to be. But the idea was that if they can't meet Energy Star most efficient because of this ADA requirement, then they should meet the base, what I would call the base Energy Star or the standard Energy Star requirement. Now, that also presumes that there are Energy Star products that are meet their needs, right? So so in other words, I'm the way I've constructed, I'm using that exception just to allow them to go down one tier from the Energy Star most efficient to Energy Star.
And what if there is no Energy Star equipment? Like that's the thing with the ADA is there is no Energy Star. There's no Energy Star most efficient. It doesn't exist. There is no Energy Star. Not yet, anyways. Might be coming. And the one that comes to mind is that it's this ADA combined washer dryer where it's like it's the same box, right? You've got the dryer and the washer are in the same thing. And we see those in ADA units. It's not necessarily, and I guess the language here is that it's considered an ADA accessible approach, but it does not have an ADA certification. You know, like I could use that in a non-ADA unit, and it does not have a an Energy Star option, but it's primarily used for ADA units. In the cases where you're replacing a stacked unit, you know, because obviously that's not accessible.
But forgive this question. I'm not as familiar on the residential side or the multifamily. Are the ADA units, are they designated as ADA units? It's not just
The dwelling unit itself would be ADA, so maybe you put it like that, but the piece of equipment is not labeled ADA.
Okay, so maybe it would be just simpler to say that appliances in ADA units are exempt from these requirements, or something as simple as that. That addresses it.
Well, I wouldn't want that to necessarily exclude things that can meet it, like refrigerators and dishwashers.
Mm-hmm.
We might just need a little bit more wordsmithing here, for
where products are not readily
yeah,
available. Yeah.
Something, yeah. And I'm only thinking about that one piece of equipment. Like I said, we have this issue with affordable housing. There's no Energy Star anything available for that particular equipment at this time. Doesn't mean it won't come later, but the project shall use Energy Star appliance where the exception is claimed, that we wouldn't be able to meet that.
Does that exception under 701.4.8.1, is that just energy monitoring that excludes, or the exception applies to R2 occupancies? Or is that broader?
That's just for the energy monitoring.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering if ADA is potentially the right or wrong language to use, because like when we're talking about like a type A or type B unit or type C, like I know clients kind of use ADA as that, like covering everything, but it doesn't mean everything.
Yeah, that's probably more correct with code language.
Just wondering how we can clarify if type A is the one
You
that
can say
needs.
accessible type A and type B, I guess.
Yeah.
A type B probably wouldn't require it though, so accessible in type A units.
That's what I'm wondering, if it's only type A. I guess aside from this exception, are there other provision or sections in here we want to focus on? Or any questions?
One thing I'll point out, and it's not really whether this is a good idea, bad idea, just more of a matter of fact, is that a lot of these items, like vending machines, even dishwashers, clothes washers, those things aren't usually inspected before. They're not required for a certificate of occupancy. And so there's not really any enforcement on these items. And I don't know, that's not a reason to not do this. I mean, this is obviously a good idea. Just wanted to point that out, that these are unregulated loads because they're typically not reviewed or inspected.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, there might be ways to increase the likelihood that they make it in to get them into some of the the basis of design or some of the other construction documents, at least they're documented the requirement. But yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah, struggle with this on codes is anything that's done post permit is tricky. I guess my minimum hope for this kind of requirement is that with this in place, that the specification of these type of equipment would be higher than it is with the naturally occurring market adoption without this requirement. So it's not going to be 100%, but they're at least stating the requirement out there.
Agreed.
Does this proposal seem like it's in a place that we could hand it to John with some of the clarification about this exception and be okay to move it forward? I will take that as acceptance. So John, I think it's just some of those notes there. But I don't intend to bring this one back to the committee. We'll post it online when it's updated, but I think it's minimal enough. And I acknowledge we only have 10 minutes left, but let's see what we can do on this last one. Work.
Okay, so this last one is I forget what the title of this was. Oh, there it is, right on the banner. Solar contribution EUI targets. So this is again is for the actually, sorry, Courtney, is this for the base code or green code?
My understanding is that this is the green code.
Okay, that's what I thought with the target that's there. I just wanted to confirm that. So, so wanted to start with brief perspective that, just noting that the Denver code and green code, but especially the green code is fairly, it's a good code. It's fairly aggressive though. And one reason it is that it treats in the target, the energy use or source energy use target, both the unregulated loads as well as the regulated loads. So those form the basis for the calculated energy use. And as we saw in the last, this is a good segue because we saw in the last proposal, it's difficult to address a lot of the unregulated loads. At least you can put in higher efficiency appliances, you can put in controls, receptacle controls. But the part of the problem is that those loads really aren't known typically at the time the building is permitted. And in fact, so the green code requires the 0.77 multiplier, essentially means that it requires a 23% whole building reduction, energy reduction from the base code. And since that incorporates both unregulated and regulated loads, if you think of a building with, let me see my notes here, but a building that has 33% of its loads as unregulated, meaning plugs and appliances and whatnot, that 23% means that you would have to have a 34% reduction in the regulated loads, the HVAC, lighting, water heating. if on an extreme case, if the unregulated loads were as high as 50%, that figure jumps to 46% of a reduction. So it's very difficult to meet. So the idea here is to allow, or the green code is to allow energy production from on-site renewable energy to offset a maximum of 15% of annual total energy load for mixed fuel and multiple fuel buildings, or to offset a maximum of 20% of the load for all electric buildings, which are certainly not required. So the idea here is if you have an all electric building, and you have a more, you can address more of the load through a PV system. And this is really, the intent of this is really providing some flexibility in meeting the energy target. And then with the higher offset allowance on this proposal for all electric, it's meant to incentivize all electric buildings, which can have additional challenges for potentially for meeting compliance with the base code or green code. So that's the basic proposal here, or the idea. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, issues?
John, my initial thought as I'm looking through this is, we have the energy model working group coming up, one starting tomorrow. So I would just want to make sure anything that is, and the working groups are deciding anything, they're hopefully coming to a consensus for a vote later at an IECC hearing. So if something like that passes, and whatever passes, will we then be able to modify this proposal based on, layering on top of the base code in IECC? Because like I'm seeing source energy here, but like if the site energy passes, like I want to make sure we're incorporating those items. So I don't want to hold us back if base code can move forward a little bit.
Right, and I mean this kind of concept could apply equally to the use of site energy as a energy metric as well. This the source to site, the site might favor certainly the electric buildings a little more than the source, but it's a basic intent. And when you think about it, this 15% for many buildings, maybe most, that's probably going to be potentially lower than the amount of unregulated energy used for the building. So it's a way, yeah. So basically it's a way to provide some flexibility to meet, to meet the target. I think it was Johnny Rogers who had a sort of different take, but a similar type of proposal where he was thinking you could maybe relax the 0.77 threshold for buildings that were all electric. The idea here is to allow some level of PV to offset the target goal.
Is there a concern about trading PV for efficiency with these higher percentages? Or trading efficiency for PV?
It's just not feasible to hit these numbers without PV. If we've got to get 23% of your regulated loads, that's going to be more than 15% of your building. It's in a really high efficiency building, it's going to be 30% of your energy costs. So you're talking about a very large percentage of loads where you can't claim any savings. And there's the only other way to get savings from them is to have on-site renewables. I'm honestly not sure I think 15% is honestly on the low side. because it's 15% of your proposed energy use, not your baseline energy use. When I get a really high efficiency building, my proposed unregulated load is probably going to be 40 to 50% of my total building energy cost. Now I know this is based on, there's also the energy usage, but this is a methodology we've been doing in Boulder now for a few years, and these are really hard metrics to achieve. We do not have a limit on solar in Boulder. So, I'd have to go back and compare and see, can we hit these numbers without solar with, reasonable design approaches when we're not allowed to otherwise claim savings for regulated loads? I don't know. I'm not sure it's really achievable.
Yeah, I mean, the R2 for multifamily buildings in particular, I believe that the lighting is not, regulated in the, considered regulated as far as the dwelling unit, so that would be harder.
Yeah, I mean, it was so onerous. We had to go to Boulder and say, hey, we can't do this, and get some flexibility in their code, basically to model things like we would for a LEED building. So, like for R2, following the Energy Star multifamily new construction protocol, which does allow us to claim some savings for regulated loads, because otherwise it just wasn't possible to get savings for to make the numbers work out. So they had to go back and relook at some things, and even that was without a limit to the solar. So it's I don't love the PCI methodology in general, because that's, again, kind of defining those regulated loads and is tricky. I agree with, I think, I can't remember if that was Courtney's statement there, but I think we should get the IECC methodology sorted out before we try to attack this one. Because I think they should be related and connected.
Right, and I think as we move forward in these conversations, we'll keep this as mind and how we can work with the DGC. I do want to acknowledge that it is 1 o'clock and I don't want to take up any more of your time. So this one I'll put as hold and bring back when we have more information. But I do appreciate everyone's time today. A lot of good conversations and some good direction on what we need to do, what we need to revisit. So thank you all very much. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, for your time.
Thanks.